When World War II ended in 1945, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the new superpowers of the world. The alliance between these two powers during the war had brought victory over the Axis powers, and the United States believed that the Soviet Union would be a partner for maintaining peace and stability in the post-war world. But before long, it became clear that the US and the Soviet Union would not be working together to maintain a peaceful world order. Shortly following World War II, the two countries entered into a tense rivalry that lasted nearly half a century. This is known as the Cold War because the two nations never engaged in open war. In February and July of 1945, agreements regarding the post-war world were made by the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, collectively known as the Big Three, at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. At these conferences, Germany was divided into occupation zones, which were supposed to have democratic elections. The leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Joseph Stalin, wasted no time in violating the agreements made at Yalta and Potsdam. He refused free elections in Eastern Europe and set about creating satellite nations, also known as communist puppet states.
So Stalin, not a nice dude at all. So everybody has their tactic in world domination. The Soviet Union is going to use a technique that I like to call the bear hug. Now, bear hugs, we like think they're kind of nice and friendly. No, this was about totalitarian force. So the bear, which is the Soviet Union, is going to come in and basically hug Eastern Europe. So those Soviet satellite states that he takes, he was supposed to hold free elections, but instead he's just going to go in and use force in order to dominate the region.
To U.S. President Harry S. Truman, this behavior was reminiscent of Hitler's in the 1930s. Truman believed that the proper means of responding to Stalin's actions was a credible threat of force. So the Truman administration decided on a policy of containment, in which further Soviet expansion would be blocked, militarily if necessary. This policy was officially established in the Truman Doctrine of 1947, which said that the U.S. would support any free country resisting Soviet takeover. Economic aid to European countries became a means of containment with the Marshall Plan, which provided money to back the Truman Doctrine. The Marshall Plan was proposed by Secretary of State George Marshall, who offered the aid of the United States to all European nations in need. The nations agreed on a plan of recovery, and in all 16 Western European nations applied for assistance. Congress was not convinced at first on the Marshall Plan, primarily because of its estimated cost, about $13 billion. Congress had been heatedly debating the plan for 10 months when Soviets backed a communist uprising in Czechoslovakia. This Soviet aggression alarmed Congress into approving the Marshall Plan in 1948 by large majorities in both houses.
If we're talking about world domination again, the United States wants to do the same thing. But instead of forcing a bear hug, we are going to use something called the Marshall Plan, which basically is going to entice people to do what we want by bribing them or giving them money. So I like to think of this as having an eagle named Marshall that goes over Western Europe and drops money onto different economies. So this is how we get people to do what we want. So the United States is going to drop $13 billion on Western Europe to our strongest allies like England and France, but we're also going to give money to places that were within the grips of the bear. So right outside of the bear's control, which would be places like Turkey and Greece. Because they were so close to the Soviet Union and that bear could come and swallow them up, we also gave them money. So Western Europe will be dominated by the Marshall Plan, and the Eastern Europe will be hugged by the bear.
A few months after the Marshall Plan was approved, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin. The city of Berlin was located in Soviet-controlled eastern Germany, but Western powers, namely the U.S., Great Britain, and France, controlled the western part of the city. On June 24, 1948, Stalin mounted a blockade, cutting off the city from its western suppliers. He cut off roadways, railroads, and waterways to West Berlin. In response, the U.S. and Great Britain flew food and other supplies into the city in what is known as the Berlin Airlift.
The best incentive would be chocolate falling from the sky. So, when Stalin tries to take over West Berlin, what he's going to do is cut down the electricity, cut down the supply lines, the railroads, all of those things that were coming into West Berlin from West Germany. So what the United States and England are going to do is fly in planes every 3 minutes during what was called the Berlin Airlift and we are going to send in a bunch of supplies. Now, to top this all off, there's going to be a pilot that says, wait, I can do a little bit more. And he's going to take it on his own to go over the city of West Berlin and wiggle his wings and drop candy from the sky. So little baby parachutes of Hershey bars falling from the plane. And these little German children, they see candy falling from the sky and they say, this is from America. And it worked really, really well.
The blockade was finally lifted May 12th of 1949. That same year, the U.S. and Canada established a defensive military alliance called NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The treaty provided a collective defense. If one country was attacked, the other countries would be obligated to help defend it. After some negotiation, this treaty expanded to 12 countries in total. The Soviet Union responded to NATO by forming an alliance of its own, the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was created on May 14, 1955. It included the Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries such as Albania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. They too pledged a collective defense, but vowed not to become involved in each other's internal affairs. In 1950, the U.S. became militarily involved in a proxy war in Korea, the Korean War. The Korean War was a civil war between North and South Korea. The Soviets backed communist North Korea, while the U.S. backed South Korea because it was capitalist and democratic. The U.S. sent money, troops, and supplies to South Korea from 1950 until 1953. The Korean War was not successful for the U.S. It ended in a stalemate. Korea remained split at the 38th parallel. This war is also known as America's Forgotten War because it didn't produce significant change for either country. The U.S. became involved in other conflicts after the Korean War, such as the Vietnam War. The U.S. entered this war largely due to President Eisenhower's domino theory. This theory said that if one country fell to communism, surrounding countries would follow suit, and communism would eventually reach the U.S. The Vietnam War was not a successful war for the U.S. All of Vietnam ended up falling to communism. It was also the first televised war, and brutality such as the My Lai massacre was seen by the American public. This led to outrage and distrust towards the government.